Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. This video is an introduction to Anglo-Norman literature. So literature in England in the period between 1066 and around 1200. So let's get started. So the starting point for this literature is obviously this Battle of Hastings, very famous battle in English history, British history, with the Norman conquest of England following this battle in 1066. So, like the Anglo-Saxons, the Normans were descendants of Germanic adventurers who had seized parts of northern France at the beginning of the 10th century. And Norman is just a contraction of Norseman. So, Normandy, obviously, here, and the Norman French were here. They invade England, end up taking over England after this Battle of Hastings. So 1066 is really this turning point, why it's such an important date in English history, marks a shift from Anglo-Saxon or Old English, both linguistically, culturally, to Anglo-Norman literature, culture, politics. So it introduced a new political, social, religious structures. The Normans are very adaptable people. They adopted the French language when they took over Normandy in France, customs. They adopted Christianity. They built castles, a vast number of castles, both in England and in northern France, to assert their dominance over their regions. Churches to express their piety. Norman bishops, interestingly, held both spiritual and political power. And the literary impact is obviously what we'll focus on. The shift is from, and at this point in time, from Old English oral traditions begin to give way to courtly French influences. So there's a rise of romance as a genre, medieval romance that had been flourishing in France, allegory, feudal themes in literature. So the Anglo-Norman period's marked by an absent kings. They're focused on their continental possession. So the early Anglo-Norman rulers prioritized their French holdings over English governance, and England was often ruled remotely with power delegated to local lords. And there's a certain amount of expansion under Henry II, and his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine expanded this French territories. So English monarchs begin to claim the French crown at around this time. This leads ultimately, the legacy of this period is it leads ultimately to the Hundred Years' War, where the English feel that they have a claim to the French crown. The Norman invasion did not lead to a vast French migration to England. This is something to note. William the Conqueror ascended the English throne. He brought with him just around 6,000 men who were mercenaries, and many of whom left the country after winning the battle and then kind of establishing rule. And by 1077, many of those mercenaries were gone. What remained were small French aristocracy that replaced the English nobility. And they consisted of those who, after becoming King of England, William had given them landed estates, so they become the new ruling aristocracy. Otherwise, there were not significant changes in general English life for the majority of the population. So, but what we do see with the Norman conquest is a significant influence of French on the English language. So English is infused, or Old English is infused with French, primarily because French becomes the language of power. French became the language of the aristocracy, government, law, while English was spoken by the common people. This led to an expansion of vocabulary. About 10,000 new words were absorbed into English from Norman French, enriching the vocabulary with law and governmental terms, and leading to an evolution of Middle English. So if you can see on the right a chart representing the provenance, uh, linguistic provenance of English, current English vocabulary. So between French and Latin, and it's via the French that we're getting these Latin terms. Over half of modern England's vocabulary is coming from these sources, and the Germanic linguistic sources are around 26%. However, the common words for everyday life, such as man, woman, eat, drink, house, go, they're all of Anglo-Saxon origin. So while French and Latin word origins constitute over half of English total vocabulary, words of German origin are the most frequently used, and this is represented in this next slide. It's the composition of modern English words by language of origin. The top 2% of the vocabulary is represented in that blue, which have German origin. So the Anglo-Norman period in terms of religion, religious themes and didactic literature remain dominant, with early works often being religious in nature. Courtly romance and chivalry become one of the main themes at this time. The influence of French literature brought themes of courtly love and chivalry to England, replacing old Germanic heroic poetry. And Arthurian legends. So the legends of King Arthur were popularized and developed during this period, shifting from old heroic tales to chivalric romances. Now, one of the works that we could spend a minute just making sure is on the radar in some way is Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain. So it's written in Latin. It was completed around 1136 of the Common Era and is structured into 12 books, presented as a chronicle from Britain's founding to the arrival of the Saxons. In there, we have a founding legend and begins with this legendary Trojan hero Brutus, who is a descendant of Aeneas, according to Geoffrey of Monmouth, who supposedly founded Britain around 1200 before the Common Era. It includes mythical figures vividly portraying legendary and semi-legendary figures such as Lear, Cymbeline, and the prophetic Merlin, and of course the King Arthur tales. So the book is famous for providing the first comprehensive account of King Arthur's life from birth to death and establishing him as a pivotal British hero. The other work I want to make sure is on our radar is Mary de France's Lais. And Mary de France was this multilingual poet and translator who wrote from approximately 1160 to 1215. And based on details in her work, scholars believe she spent a significant amount of time in England at the court of Henry II and his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was likely her patroness. So her works include the Lay, Aesop's Fables, and St. Patrick's Purgatory. Her works were popular in aristocratic circles, often featuring lower class characters as more worthy and women as strong central characters, and her works influenced later writers such as Chaucer, Dante, and Thomas Malory. The Lay of Marie de France are a collection of 12 short narrative poems written in Anglo-Norman during the 12th century, and the poems are known for their celebration of love, individuality of character, and vivid descriptions. They're considered to be the foundation for the genre, the Breton lay, and they're generally focused on the concept of courtly love through the adventures of their characters. So courtly love, what do we mean by that? Anglo-Norman period saw the introduction of chivalric romance into the British Isles, including the conventions of courtly love. And here are some of the, let's say, the main conventions of courtly love. First of all, we have a knight who has an idealized, often unrequited love for a noble woman who's typically married or unattainable. And this gives it this unattainable nature. Now, I'll say, first of all, this is, let's say, the courtly love of this period, the Anglo-Norman period, or the Middle Ages. Later in the Renaissance, courtly love conventions will develop and mingle with Neoplatonism that was having a revival in the Renaissance. And this unattainable nature of the the lady would would be associated with the Platonic ladder of love. It would be a way of moving the lover up through a Platonic ladder of love. Hmm. So I'll include a link to my introduction to Elizabethan sonnets, which describes this courtly love conventions and the background of that and how it melded with Neoplatonism and led to that notion of courtly love. Here, we don't yet have that Neoplatonic dimension. So the love requires the knight to serve her with humility and devotion, and this service leads to moral and spiritual growth while also being an adulterous passion because she's married, maybe in the case of Guinevere and Lancelot, married to the king. So key examples include the Arthurian romances, famously by Chrétien de Troyes, and the epic poem Tristan and Isolde. So the Lay of Marie de France demonstrate courtly love by featuring noble characters in passionate, often secret affairs, where knights humble themselves before idealized ladies and prove their worth through service and suffering. And her work presents love as an intense, often tragic force that can bring both joy and suffering, sometimes to the point of death, but ultimately portrays it as worthwhile pursuit that can overcome social and physical obstacles. It also subverts some of these conventions by highlighting women's agency, making them more active participants who can have significant power over men. I want to highlight one interpretation of these courtly love themes within medieval literature, that being that the courtly love conventions were invented as a way to, in a coded manner, relay the religious beliefs of Catharism, which is this dualist Christian movement that flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries and basically held that belief that the material world was created by an evil God, so a variety of Gnosticism in this way, while the spiritual world was good, and they rejected the material nature of Jesus' body and Catholic sacraments. So Cathars lived ascetic lives and were persecuted by the Catholic Church through events like the Albigensian Crusade and the Inquisition. So the interpretation of courtly love as an allegory for Catharism suggests that troubadour poetry expressed Cathar ideals in a coded or symbolic way, so a form of defensive esotericism. So I'll put a link to my lectures on esoteric literature, and in there we describe how defensive esotericism is a form of coding the literary expression such that potentially uh, setting views where society would persecute the author for holding those views, so they could be coded and thus defend the author and defend the work from being persecuted in that way. This theory posits that the lady represents the spirit and the lover's devotion and suffering are analogous to the Cathar pursuit of a pure spiritual existence in a corrupt material world, a connection amplified by the fact that courtly love flourished in the same region and time as the Cathar heresy. So with that, I'm going to close our introduction to Anglo-Norman literature. Next lecture will go on to Middle English literature from 1200 to 1485. Thank you very much.